Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fides podcast. My name is Jerry Serino and I'm your host, and I'm here with talent on loan from Rush. We've been nailed lately with a lot of things, whether it's censorship or whether it's mandates. People being fired for simply speaking or having a certain belief. And while we as individuals, I think we're all strong enough to defend ourselves against these attacks, very, very often we need legal support, right? Because these things have to be fought in court when an injustice is done. And one of those individuals is my guest today. Davis Younts is an attorney. He's a former military officer, and he is helping people who are faced with all of these overreaches by government and other institutions. So, Davis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jerry. I appreciate you having me on and addressing these issues. They're so important right now.
Yes, they really are. And it doesn't get enough attention because literally people's lives are being destroyed in some cases with whether they're being fired or they lose their job because of mandates. So take me through, you come from a military background, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, and so we saw the mandates, the vaccine mandates hit our military obviously pretty hard, and like non-military people, a lot of people were forced to say, or faced with the decision, what do I do here? I got a family I have to provide for, and yet they were hit with these mandates. So tell me, how that went and where things are at now after all this is kind of come full circle almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with sort of my personal journey in this. As a Christian, I served on active duty in the Air Force for 11 years. 9/11 happened when I was in law school, so I volunteered to serve. I did my part. I deployed, did everything the Air Force asked of me, got out after 11 years and continued to serve in the Guard and Reserves. So when this mandate came out, I was right at 19 years of service, total service. And because of my faith, I had a conviction that I couldn't participate in this vaccine. So for me personally, I was looking at, okay, what is the process going to be? Are we going to acknowledge federal law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act? Are we going to recognize religious accommodations and medical accommodations in the military? So it started with that for me. It very quickly became clear that this was a huge issue for military members. At one point, when you look across the services, there were 250,000 military members that had a religious objection, medical exemption, or another objection to this vaccine mandate. And that included Navy SEALs, fighter pilots, and other things. So I got involved in this fight publicly with the Navy SEALs. There was a group of Navy SEAls who were being told they were being threatened with court-martial if they didn't get this vaccine, guys that deployed, guys that have done everything, taken lives for this country. And that's the position they were in. So that's when I got publicly involved in this. And that's kind of where the battle for religious freedom, but also just for medical sanity in the military began with all of this. And it's been a very interesting battle. So where it started was military members, myself, Navy SEALs, and otherwise were being threatened with court-martial. If we didn't set aside our religious faith, if we didn't take this vaccine, we were going to be court-martialed. Now, initially, back in 2020, Congress intervened and they did something very small, but they said, hey, the worst case scenario for someone who's being kicked out over the vaccine mandate is a general under honorable conditions discharge. That seems very simple. It seems like a small thing, but what it did is it took away any incentive for the military to court-martial service members, because the only real punishment they wanted from a court-martial is a dishonorable discharge. That's what the military wanted. That's the threat they wanted. So when Congress did that, everything became more administrative for most folks rather than court-martial. So that's kind of where it started. As things moved on, we realized the military wasn't going to grant religious accommodations. They had a plan in place from the beginning to ignore the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, ignore the constitutional rights of service members, and rig the religious accommodation system. So that's kind of where this battle really got ugly, and that's when you saw federal litigation come in.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by, you can resist and we can try to speak out and voice our opinions, but at some point we need legal, help. It has to be adjudicated in the courts, and that's where someone like you comes into play, and because people don't know where to turn, right? If they lose their job, or they're potentially losing their job. So when we get into the vaccine enforcements, what we also had that went along with that, and still goes along with it, was censorship of seemingly any discussion of it, right? And people just wanting to ask questions, people voicing their opinions, hearing about things, and wanting to know, hey, is this true or is that true? Tell us about that aspect of it, because that's a legal thing. That's the First Amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge issue within the military and across all of society. We saw this, government collusion with private companies to censor information, and to anything that, even just to put out inaccurate information, to push this down. So within the military, you saw that as well. Anyone who made statements that say, hey, I have questions about this, this doesn't make sense, I have sincere concerns with the way we're handling this, you were seen as disloyal. I mean, I have individuals I've spoken to who had their security clearances pulled because they were perceived as making disloyal statements because they were asking questions about the vaccine. So that's the kind of pressure you see. I had a client, a colonel, a full colonel, a commander. She said she submitted her own religious accommodation, and she said, hey, I have 2 civilians that work for me, and they have both already been vaccinated. And the Air Force said, well, you need to give them an order to get vaccinated as civilians. This is what they said, which was, again, pulled back because everyone knew that was an unlawful order. But they gave these 2 civilians. And she said, hey, I can't do that, but my boss is more than happy to give that written order. And by the way, there's only 2 civilians that work for me, and it doesn't matter. They're already vaccinated anyway. They fired her from her command position simply because she wouldn't give the order. She didn't feel comfortable because of her religious faith giving that order. So within the military, it's worse. And this shocks people. But again, I think it's so important to tell these stories. I mean, this goes to military medical providers. There are military medical providers who looked at individuals' medical records and said, you have things that even the FDA and CDC say this vaccine is contraindicated. And military doctors were told, if you grant a medical exemption on that basis, we're going to go after your credentials to practice medicine. We're going to go after your license. That absolutely happened in this. I had a client submitted a religious accommodation, and people, again, this is wild, but he submitted a religious accommodation, denied, submitted a medical accommodation. Why? He had adverse reactions to 2 different families of antibiotics. He's been told, FDA, CDC on their website, if you have that reaction, don't get this vaccine. Submitted the medical accommodation request. They said denied. He said, okay, I'm going to wait. I'm going to see if there's anything else I can do, if I can get a second opinion. His brother and sister went out. They both had adverse reactions to this product. Both did. One collapsed in a parking lot outside of a CVS and had to be hospitalized because of an adverse reaction. He submitted all of that information, including medical opinions from primary care physicians saying, don't get this vaccine. The Air Force provider he talked to first told him, a captain said, hey, I'm going to have to recommend denial of this because it doesn't fit any of the things we're going to give exemptions for. But if I were you, I wouldn't take this. So it went up to an 06 in the Air Force, a physician in the Air Force who put in an email and said to my client, hey, your exemption request is denied, but if you're uncomfortable, just get admitted to the hospital first. That way, if you go into anaphylactic shock, they'll be able to bring you back. So
yeah, it's unbelievable to me, the levels of, I don't even know what it is, and I know you're coming from from a legal perspective on all this stuff, but it always makes me ask the question, and I don't know if you're interested in commenting on this, is to why, right? I mean they're making these medical decisions. If it was something else, if it was another medicine, another something else, whatever it is,
any
they
other
would look at
vaccine before, any other vaccine before.
Right. They would look at it medically, like doctors do every day when they're treating patients for whatever it is. They make these decisions and they say, yeah, you shouldn't do this, or I'm going to take you off of this medicine because of this. Why? What do you think, if you're interested in commenting, even though you're an attorney? And
No, I'll listen. I'll weigh into that because it starts with just this, and this is the thing I've had to wrestle with. Again, I retired in December, 20 years of service. The only reason I got to retirement was because of an injunction in federal court. My religious accommodation was denied, my appeal was denied, and I got there. But from the beginning, what became clear is it didn't matter how or why. The goal was 100% vaccination. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter why. The clear expectation from the administration in the White House, from the Pentagon was you will get to 100%. That's it. So knowing that then explains why they ignored the law with regard to religious accommodations, medical exemptions, anything else, just ignored it. Then it gets to why. It's political. There is a political reason behind this. I don't fully know what that is. I have concerns. I have grave concerns that it's a push to get conservatives out of the military. Honestly, to get Orthodox Christians out of the military. I can't prove that. I can't prove that in court. But I can say that's been the result. That's been the result. Anyone that was willing to ask questions, take a stand, just even ask what we're trained to do, ask questions. Is this a lawful order? There's no place for that. There's no place for that in today's military. So is it a purge of conservatives and Christians? It feels like it. Can't prove that, but it definitely feels that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's got to be something. I don't know what it is. There's a lot of theories, and that certainly is a good one. But it just seems like they threw out all natural sense of logic and normal medical practice when it came to the vaccine. And we're talking about, too, by the way, people that you're representing in the military who are among the healthiest among us, very likely. And, you know, if they're even in and around my age or your age, their survival rate, if they got COVID, was 99.59%. I mean, or and above. So the likelihood of them even being hurt from COVID was basically zero. You know,
and unlike any previous vaccine, within Department of Defense instructions, if you have natural immunity, right, positive serology for a previous illness, you get an exemption from vaccines. That's part of military law, administrative process within the military. They ignored that for this vaccine. And my clients, I mean, Navy SEALs, fighter pilots, these guys deploy all the time. They absolutely had natural immunity. We tested them. They had it. It was there. And that was being ignored. Even as studies were coming out showing natural immunity was more effective than multiple vaccinations, they were still denying it. So again, it's very, very different, unprecedented sort of reaction to this. And then just the way that even those medical pieces of it were handled from a military readiness standard, it makes no sense to say of a Navy SEAL, of a Coast Guard rescue swimmer, you know, you've had COVID, you survived COVID, you have no comorbidities with COVID. We're going to make you take an experimental vaccine that's contraindicated for someone with your age, with your physical background. It's amazing.
Yeah, there have been so many, you know, lies and covering up of the truth. I mean, let's not forget too that we were also told that the vaccine would prevent you from getting COVID and prevent you from transmitting COVID. We were told that. Not by, you know, just rumor. We were told that by the supposed experts. And do we see them backing down from these mandates now that it's quite obvious that it doesn't work?
No. And so what happened within the Department of Defense is the Department of Defense was refusing to back down, even as they're losing in court, even as everything was going against them under the law, especially the religious freedom aspects of this. They're clearly were violating religious freedom of military members. It took Congress acting and forcing the Department of Defense hands. So that's kind of where we're at now. We're in this world of what's going to happen to those still serving who took this stand. And we're looking at a lot of reprisal and retaliation, unfortunately. So you have to understand they're military commanders that threaten people, look people in the eye and said, we'll court-martial you if you don't do this. Congress acted once. Then it took Congress acting again. And now I have thousands of clients still serving that their future is uncertain because of their religious faith or because of their medical history and because they were willing to take this stand.
Yeah, it's all so sad to me, Davis. That it's so unnecessary because especially as we have seen that it doesn't work. You know, I mean, there's no evidence here that it stops the spread, that it stops you from getting it. You know, at least have the decency and humility to say, okay, you know what? Let's take a time out. Maybe we were wrong on some of these things. Let's back off. And it seems like they don't. They continue to pursue or double down on their dishonesty. So we could talk about this all day long, and it really frustrates me because I know people who sought religious exemptions in, you know, in the private sector, and they were denied. So I'm like, why do you even offer it if you're going
Right.
to deny it every time? And some people lost their jobs because of it, and you know, it's a mess. But so I want to get into another area that you focus on, and that is what we've seen a lot lately, specifically since the Roe v. Wade case was overturned. We saw a tremendous amount of very violent attacks on pro-life groups or organizations, crisis pregnancy centers. Kind of went ignored. I think our attorney general just under Congress recently said, well, the reason that we haven't really prosecuted anybody in those cases because they do it at night, and we, you know, it's harder to figure them out. But yet they have gone after and arrested pro-lifers for just praying or standing outside, and they've gone after them with guns in multiple SWAT teams, innocent people. Tell us about that and your experience in protecting people in those circumstances.
Yeah, it's been a very, very difficult time because what we see is, again, we're talking about politicization. And so we have to think about that. We saw it in the military and we're seeing it in the Department of Justice. So we're seeing, senior leadership in DC in the Department of Justice using the Department of Justice as a political weapon to target certain people because of their point of view and then ignore other criminal actions. So you're absolutely right. You're seeing threats, you're seeing repeated arsons, you're seeing bombings of pregnancy care centers, of places where pregnant women can go just to get resources and food and talk about adoption or get baby formula. I mean, just wonderful organizations. All they're doing is helping people. You're there voluntarily. It's volunteers that work there. And they're being targeted and very, very dangerously, including Supreme Court justices. Supreme Court justices' very lives being threatened, protesting outside of their homes, protesting in their neighborhoods, no reaction to it, no arrests coming out of it. And then you have a gentleman like Mark Houck here in Pennsylvania who's peacefully counseling people on a sidewalk where he's allowed to be. He's done it for years, and he just intervenes to stop someone from insulting and coming after his son, and that results in a federal prosecution. So absolutely, it just like within the military, it's a grave concern that we are taking the idea of political will is more valuable than the law, right? We're a nation of laws so long as we have the political will to follow the law. The military chose to ignore the Constitution, chose to ignore federal law regarding religious accommodations. They chose to ignore federal law with regard to what's required in order to mandate a medical product in the military. We're seeing the same throughout the DOJ with these prosecutions. And it's very disturbing. And some of the problem is if we talk about very, very liberal areas of the country. So, getting a fair jury and getting a fair trial in parts of California, parts of Oregon, where I was born, DC, very, very difficult when we talk about these political cases. So that's where we hope, prosecutorial discretion will come in, and they won't just go after people because they think they can get a conviction if they bring it in the right jurisdiction. That's deeply concerning and troubling.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's really the police state, right? It's what you hear about third world countries where the party in power goes after their political enemies, and including a peaceful protester, yet they allow pretty violent protesters and they just ignore it. And everyone should be concerned with that, regardless of where you stand on all these things, because the tables could be turned. And I don't want them to be turned. You're right. I don't want a Republican administration to go after only, left-wing individuals. I don't want that. I want, equal execution of the law and the like. So, okay. So going a little bit further into free speech, and you may have experience specifically with this, but I feel like that our government is inching closer and closer and is even there to going after actual religious denominations, specifically the Catholic Church, even because the Catholic Church has been, as an organization, has been very strong on pro-life, against gay marriage and the like, and so have other churches. But what do you think? How close do you think, or are we there? Do you have clients that are being attacked or fired from their job because they're Christian or they're Catholic, and the company knows what their views are?
So yes, and I have grave concerns for what we see moving forward. So we see it usually starts subtly, and email seems like a funny place to bring it up. But if you think, so many people put like a tagline in their email, right? So they put a tagline in their email. They say, maybe it's a Bible verse, maybe it's a quote. Military members like to do that. And so I have clients that have put Bible verses in there when everybody else, they put a pride flag or Ukrainian flag, whatever political issue it is, they put something in there, they put a statement in there. As soon as you put a Bible verse in there, I have had clients that have been threatened to be fired if they did it again or didn't take it out because it offended someone. And then pronoun usage is becoming a hot topic across the board. And that's where we see it very, very quickly. So we see pronoun usage, mandated pronoun usage, being a potential cause for termination. So it's being deemed discriminatory, it's being deemed misconduct. And so churches, church organizations, Christian businesses, Christian schools need to be very, very cautious as they move forward, because there's not a safe space. And gay marriage is something that I counsel a lot of churches about, and I counsel pastors in dealing with that issue, because we've created a situation in our country where we have pastors performing a magisterial function for the state because pastors are allowed to sign a marriage license. And I've said to pastors, we need to be very cautious, not saying we shouldn't have state issued marriage licenses, but a state could say, well, if you're going to sign a marriage license, you can't discriminate on who you marry, even as a minister, even if that goes against your religious faith. So that's something to keep a very, very close eye on. And people think, if they're not paying attention in this area, that we sound, like we're being conspiratorial or something else. But look to Canada and look to what's going on in Great Britain. You cannot pray silently within 100 feet of an abortion mill in the United Kingdom without being arrested. And they've arrested a woman twice for that. Public property, simply because her speech act is silently praying, not bothering anybody, simply the act of prayer itself. We've seen very similar things going on in Canada with the laws that they have passed regarding pronoun usage and other things, and there's criminal and civil penalties that come along with that. So we're seeing efforts to pass those things in the United States. So we do have to be wary. We do have to be concerned. And again, particularly, depending on where you live in the country, there's some states that are pushing hard for things like that, and for things that force Christians, force Orthodox Catholics to take a stand because of their religious faith that is deemed incompatible by those in authority.
Yeah. It's, for those that like to deal in the philosophical and the deeper stuff outside of the law, although they're really commingling now. We look at socialist or communist societies throughout history. They always attack religion, always. Right. It always ultimately comes to that. And I find it interesting. You were talking about pronoun use and, gay pride flag and stuff like that. It's funny because I see that a lot. I keep my politics, even religion, out of business, out of work. It's just the way I do. I'm not here to do that. It's not the place. But companies seem to, the NFL, the NBA, they seem to be able to take a stand and even make people take a stand with, something on the back of their jersey or on their helmets and stuff like that. Or as you said, people are given hey, use this in your Zoom background for the month of gay pride if you want. I haven't seen anything mandatory yet, at least that I'm in my circles, but, they could make political statements. They could, a friend of mine, their CEO sent out a statement after Roe v. Wade, basically saying, hey, we'll support women if you want to go out of state or something. Where does that line draw? Why is it that they are allowed to, but an individual cannot?
And I think that one of the things we just have to wrestle with as a society is, what is religion and what is religious faith? And I'm firmly convinced that atheism, secular humanism, that's a religion. That's a belief set. That's a religious faith. And so it really, to me, comes down to this myth of neutrality, this idea that our religious faith can somehow be separated from everything else we do. That's simply not true. That's not how worldview works. And so I think that's really important as a foundational philosophical issue to wrestle with. You know, my very strong belief is, you know, our Constitution, our system of laws in this country, even just being a nation that says, hey, we're going to be governed by the rule of law, comes from a specific worldview, a Judeo-Christian ethic worldview and background. That's the foundation of our Constitution. And to me, that's the only system in history that's ever led to true freedom, you know, true religious freedom. Strong Orthodox Christians and Catholics believe in religious freedom. They believe in the freedom of ideas and sharing ideas. It really is secular humanism, atheism, which is, you know, the belief system, the religion of communism and socialism that always leads to tyranny, because there's no place for faith, because it's convicting, I think, in part. But if there's just no place for it. So we do have to wrestle with that. We do have to figure out, what is the church's role in society? And are we simply just going to, you know, only focus on what we do within the four walls of the church, or is it going to impact how we interact with politics, education, and the rest of society?
Yeah, for sure. So the last area I'm hoping you have some thoughts on, I don't know, again, I don't know if you handle cases like this, or you're actively, is this whole equity and inclusion and stuff. And you hear of businesses saying, we're only hiring minorities, we're only going to promote people of color. You know, we're trying, people saying that we want to increase our levels of minorities in these positions, and so they're hiring based upon that. Obviously, to me, I'm going, well, that's discrimination. We're all against that. Are you seeing any of that out there within your clients?
I am. Unfortunately, one place that we see it as a huge issue right now is within the military. There is a huge diversity, equity, and inclusion push within the military. And so what we're seeing is, you know, all things being equal, there is a disadvantage for white males within the military. You know, we're not supposed to say things like that out loud or in polite company, but there is a disadvantage to that. And there is an emphasis on background, on race, on gender, more than performance. And that's very concerning to me as someone who served in the military for 2 decades. You know, to me, inside or outside the military, if it's business, the board should be focused on how can we be successful making a profit as a business. If it's the military, I mean, literally the job of the military, the job of the Air Force when I was in, is to break things and kill people. We need the people that are best qualified to do that when we're fighting a just war against enemies that are a threat to us. That's what we do. That's what we want Navy SEALs to do. That's what we want fighter pilots to do. We want the best people in those jobs. So it's a legal concern. Because there aren't protections, there aren't rights for people that don't fall into whatever is determined to be an oppressed minority group. At least that's what it feels like to my clients. That's the level of discrimination we see. And quite frankly, you know, allegations become convictions in that environment, right? So if someone is perceived to have been unfair or discriminatory or intended something, you know, that had no ill intent behind it, but was said in an improper way, then those individuals are convicted, at least in the court of public opinion and among their command, before they've even had a fair hearing. So we see that a lot, particularly with chaplains. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that there. But throughout the military, throughout the federal government, there is a real push. It's slower, I think, to get a lot of attention in private industry until we have something like the Silicon Valley Bank that fails. And then we have to ask questions like, why were people put into those positions? Was it based on experience and skill or something else? But I have grave concerns with that in the military because it impacts readiness. Absolutely.
No, yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, if you're a fan of a football team, you want the best. Who cares the color? If you want a good military, you want the best. Who cares about their color or ethnicity? I really don't. You know, as someone once said, no one cares about the ethnicity of the fireman carrying you out of the burning building, right?
100%.
We just want the best fireman doing that, or doctor, right? I don't care about the ethnicity of the doctor giving me heart surgery. Really great stuff. You know, this is really so. Davis Younts, where can people connect with you? For those watching, I'm scrolling Davis's website at the bottom of the screen. But if you can, David, for those just listening, just describe where people can connect with you and follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter. So it's at Davis, Davis, my last name Younts. So at Davis Younts on Twitter. And then the website is yontslaw.com. So, stay in touch with us. We're working on a lot of things for the military. We're also going to be starting a nonprofit soon that's going to be very focused on federal law enforcement and military members. So more to follow on that. Definitely follow us on Twitter as that comes forward. There's a lot of work to be done. We're not done with this battle yet, but Jerry, it's great to be on. I love following your work. You're doing some great work, brother, and it's great to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, people need to connect because even if any of these issues don't specifically affect you right now, believe me, there's something else in the very near future that they're going to come after us for. And like I said in the beginning, we can fight ourselves, but we at some point need legal help and guidance because that's where we have to take it, at some point for everybody. So, Younts Law, YOUNTS law.com is where you go. Please connect with Davis and show him support because he's doing some really great work. So, Davis, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank all of you for listening to this episode of Fides Podcast. Please check out all my podcasts and all the different podcast apps on YouTube, on Rumble, and on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on rightamericamedia.com. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.